Hello, 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 everybody. It's Susie McMahon with our virtual book club meeting for the month of April. And boy, we have a lot of wonderful, wonderful guests here with us tonight. I just wanted to first welcome back Pamela Terry.
Hi.
Pamela, our author who we featured back in December, The Sweet Taste of Muscadines. And for those of you that went down to Beaufort, South Carolina for the Low Country Literary and Leisure Getaway, you were able to meet Pamela in
Yes.
person. Welcome back, Pamela.
Thank you. It was a great time in Beaufort, and I'm glad to be back.
Thank you. And of course, we have my fearless helper, Melissa St. Clair. She's up here and helping me with the interview tonight. But with no further ado, Jeff Kleinman has so graciously agreed to come join us tonight to speak on behalf of his author. He is the literary agent of Robert Hicks. Jeff is coming to us from his home in New York City. So let's see, how many states do we have? We have South Carolina, we have Colorado, Georgia, and North Carolina, or excuse me, in New York, all on tonight. And I can't wait to see where everybody is watching from. Please, those of you that are out there watching, let us know where you're watching from. Jeff, welcome to
Thank you.
my virtual book club. How are you doing tonight?
I'm so happy to be here. So thank you guys for letting me talk about Robert for half an hour or so.
Yeah.
You are so welcome. What I wanted to do right off the bat is for Jeff to go into his explanation of how he actually met Robert Hicks, our featured author of this month, The Widow of the South. And Jeff, we heard a story back in January, and now I'm ready to hear your version.
But from what I remember, Robert just kind of called me one day and said, I have this book idea. And so you get a lot of kind of writers who will call you and do that. But I think you all know, since you got to speak to him, there's something about Robert Hicks. I'll probably start crying.
No, don't.
He was so bizarrely connecting with people. So one of my favorite stories is he called me. He was on a book tour. It was supposed to be a 12-city book tour. It ended up being 40 cities because everyone loved him so much. But he called me from San Francisco, and he was whispering, and he was like, I'm going to be late. Can you tell the bookseller I'm going to be late? And I'm like, Robert, why? He said, I started talking to this taxi driver, and the taxi driver pulled over and is telling me his life story, and I can't figure out how to leave. That's like so Robert Hicks.
Yeah.
So there's something about him, and he starts talking, and the world disappears. I don't know if you guys felt that, or you're like, oh my god, I wish he'd stop. But if he's on a roll, if he was on a roll, you felt like he like you have no idea, like time passes. So my other favorite story, can I give you one more and then I'll stop?
Please.
Is so when a book is launched, and this book was I sold it on 100 pages. He didn't have the we didn't have the it was just too complicated to sell the whole. He hadn't written the whole book, and I thought I could sell it 100 pages. So he wrote the 100 pages. We ended up selling it, and the editor, who's just this kind of legendary editor, her name's Amy Einhorn, and she did The Help, among many other kind of bestsellers. And Amy said she wanted to do a breakfast meeting with Robert, and I was like, okay, that's fine. So they flew Robert in, and these breakfast meetings last from it's like 8:30 in the morning, and they're over by 9:15. Like, they're always over. This is like, you go in, the author talks, and you get going with the day, right? So, and it's just the author and the sales force and the other people, the marketing execs. And so 9:30 came, and I was like, God, I wonder why Robert hasn't called. And 10 o'clock came. God, I hope everything's okay. And finally, 11:30. So like these things are supposed to last half an hour. 11:30, Robert and Amy both call me. They just ended the meeting, and Robert said, like, he said, he's like, I finally just said, don't y'all have any place to be? and otherwise they would have stayed all day, I think. Like, there was just something about him. So
That's amazing. So when he called you, had he written anything? I mean, did he have, or was it just an outline and an idea, or had he written it?
So he told me the story of Carnton, which you all know.
Right.
And I said, well, and he sent me a manuscript. And what he'd done is a friend of his, a guy named Hunter K, and he were driving down the road, and he said, let's write this book. Hunter, you write it, and I'll give you the ideas. And Hunter didn't really have the muscles, the writer muscles, to really do this book. So eventually Robert just took it on and did it himself without Hunter. But the first drafts I saw were with Hunter.
I see. Well, Robert, it was amazing because, I mean, when I was picking out what to read tonight, he was such a great writer. I mean, just to come out of nowhere and do this, he was a beautiful writer. And I wish he could have done more. I kept trying to poke him and say, do more. But of course, that time he wasn't feeling too well. So I don't think that was high on his agenda. But that's great. Well, I remember my agent, when I told her I met you, Jeff, she said, Kim Whalen, she said that she remembered Robert. She said, because when you sold the book, she and friends were after I guess it was the Frankfurt Book Fair anyway, they were in Paris. And she said everybody in publishing was talking about this man, Robert Hicks. And she said, everybody was talking about him because he was such a big personality.
He was also like so loyal in a way. Loyal isn't the right word. I don't know the word, because at one point Amy said something like, oh, aren't you worried? Because a lot of times what will happen is when an author gets big enough, they get poached, it's called. Like an agent will call you up and say, oh, you should work with me as opposed to some other agent. And that happens fairly frequently, that agents will try doing that. And sorry, I'm putting on Do Not Disturb, so I don't keep getting texts.
Fine, I totally understand. We all forget, and then we're like, oh yeah, these electronics get us.
And so she called me and she's like, well, so-and-so is talking to Robert about working with him. And like just sort of pulling my leg. And I was like, well, that's just not true. So like, what? Because like I knew Robert like would give you his heart. Like that's just not a Robert Hicks thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, kind of
he's steadfast. Yeah.
So are there other stories I can tell you about him or about writing the book? Tell me what I can help give any insight.
Well, what I was going to do is see if Pamela could remind us all about how she met Robert, and also talk a little bit about how he has so many influences, not just as a best-selling author, but what we chatted about before we started the show. And then I have Melissa coming up with a question for you next, Jeff. Go ahead, Pamela.
Sure. My husband is a songwriter, and years ago, Robert was in music publishing, and he also represented different artists. And so every quarter, every month, he would have what musicians call a guitar pool. And what that meant was songwriters would come to his place and bring a guitar, and everybody would sit around and sing their latest, something they'd written recently. And so I got to meet him there. I had gone up. We stayed in Atlanta, and Pat would go back and forth to Nashville like a week out of every month and write. But he does a lot of writing by himself, so he was able to do that. But that's how I met him. And I remember the night I was there, oh gosh, there were so many. The guy from, who does Born to Be Wild? Steppenwolf was there. And it was just disparate group of people, but it was just a jolly time. So that's how I got to meet Robert. And when I would go up, sometimes when there was a dinner or a concert or something like that, I would inevitably see Robert. So that I had him in that box. He was in the musician box. And then I had a design business for a long time and did people's houses. And one day I picked up Antiques Magazine and I'm reading through, and there's this incredible article on this collector in Nashville who has this amazing collection of early American furniture, fine early American furniture, as well as folk art. And it was Robert. And so I saw him at several antique shows and in auctions. And so then I got to know him that way. And then he wrote the book. And when I wrote mine, I contacted him and I said, look, don't do it if you don't want to. And I want you to read it first, but I'd love for you to blurb the book. And he said, oh, of course, send it up, send it up. So he wrote me, actually he called me and he said, I didn't know what to think. He said, but damn it, you can write. And so I knew him in every version. And it was amazing how he excelled in every version. I told Susie the one thing I didn't, wasn't really familiar with him in is his bourbon. And I had some of that at his wake. And like I said, I don't think I'll ever catch a cold again. It's protected me forever. But that was the one thing I didn't. But supposedly his bourbon's amazing. So, he was an amazing guy. And in all those different areas, he excelled. So he did a lot.
That is so fantastic. I love hearing that. So, of course, I have an old-fashioned landline that's ringing in the background. Melissa, I'm going to mute myself real quick. Can you ask Jeff a question?
Yes, it would be my pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. The question is, what is your favorite aspect of your role as a literary agent?
Oh, I thought we were talking about Robert. Dang. The thing that's really fun, there's two things that kind of go together. I read this other novel. Actually, Robert, I can use Robert as an example. The thing that's so cool about what I do, and I think you guys can get it, is that I see stuff that's totally unfiltered. So like when you read a book that's in any of the books behind Pamela right now, are books that somebody, unless they're all self-published, there's a team, there's a corporation that has somehow approved this. And like an editor, when they see a book, the agent's seen it and has approved it. So you're getting something that's filtered. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so sometimes when you read and it's like you're just reading and no one's seen it before. Mm-hmm. And it's somehow like the most intimate way of reading that I've ever had. So my example I'll do with Robert, it wasn't as dramatic as some of the others, but I sold it on 100 pages and I was reading it going down to a writer's conference in New Orleans. And I got halfway down and you all know the story, right? The Cashwell coming to Carton, the whole war, Civil War. So there's a scene where Cashwell, and actually this is the scene that Senator Frist read at Robert's funeral. Where Cashwell is thinking about what it means to die. And I started bawling in the middle of the airplane. And the stewardess, she comes over and she's like, are you okay, sir? I'm like, yes. Bawling my ass out. But there's something really intimate about reading. And my other story, I read this novel, it's called The Art of Racing in the Rain, that got made into a movie a few years ago. Mm-hmm. But I read it on the train and coming up to Penn Station, and I was so derailed by this book. Have you ever been to Penn Station? But they used to have these huge trash cans, and I kept like walking into the trash can like Pac-Man. I couldn't figure out. I couldn't look down. I couldn't make things work. I couldn't get to the exit. I couldn't make like the doors open. Like my muscles had disintegrated. Mm-hmm. And that feeling about reading when you get so like your body like betrays you is kind of cool.
That's why you're such a great agent, though, because you know that magic of story and you know that magic of book, and you can still be touched by it.
I think it's really hard though. It's really hard to find stuff that makes you do that. I remember this one novel I read and I got like lightheaded and I realized I'd stopped breathing. Like you have to breathe. I was sitting there like and then I was like
what was it? You have to say what it was.
It was a memoir that ended up being published. It was a big Target pick, but the book didn't do very well. It's called The Autumn Balloon, which I think is not a good title, but it's a story of this kid who, when he was 16, his mother his mother decided to drink herself to death, and all of his close relatives had died terrible, unbelievably awful drug-related deaths. And she's like, I'm going to go drink myself to death, go find a family. And he sort of reconstitutes family living on the streets. And the reason it's called the Autumn Balloon is because every fall they would go collect balloons from like Walmart and Target and fill them up. But it would be like Happy Mother's Day, like just balloons. And the mother would write a note in Sharpie marker to all the dead, and they would let them up in the sky.
Oh wow!
And he was waiting to the day that he had this image of this father raking leaves with his young son, rakes up the balloon with his name on it. Oh, wow. Because he'd be one of the dead people. And so they call the Autumn Balloon, but it's too complicated to explain all this, you know? But anyway, that's the reason. I think it's so fun to make people's dreams come true, but it's even more fun to fall in love with a book.
Mm-hmm. And I have a follow-up question to what we talked about earlier about how you met Robert. So he had an idea for a book, and then this incredible novel that we've all read was produced. And I know that there's subsequent works, The Orphan Mother. What's the name? What's the second one? Orphan Mother. And I'm excited to move on to that one. I mean, how did everything continue to morph? I mean, was it just there was so much creativity in the story once the historical fiction novel was written? Can you tell us a little bit about how the work we just read came about, and then how the story continued?
So out of the first book, we ended up using the book that Hunter wrote. We ended up using, "Please, ma'am, I'd like some water." Like that was the one line that made it into The Widow of the South. And the book was enough of a success that Amy wanted to do a couple more books. And so then it was a question to figure out what they were. And so Separate Country, I think, is just more cerebral. It's less kind of emotional. And that's set in New Orleans. And then the last one is Returns to Carnton, and it's about the slave, who at this point is no longer an enslaved person, Mariah, whose son is killed, and she goes to hunt for the guy's murderer. So it was sort of a creative process. Like with Robert, you sat down and talked it all out a lot, and you kind of thought it all out, and then it was a process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When I finished reading, I took the time, of course, to read the reading group guide. And I wanted to kind of read something from here, and then maybe get some feedback from you on it, if I could, Jeff, and then Pamela will have you share your portion of the actual novel that you wanted to share, if that's okay. I really like this question. What is Carnton like today, and what is your role there? And his answer is, after struggling through a nearly 15-year restoration based on scholarship and study, Carnton is shining again. Without a significant endowment, affiliation with any patriotic organization, or public money, the nonprofit association that owns Carnton has carried on restoration on par with the best scholarship in the nation today. Personally, I've held about every role imaginable on the site. But most of the concern these days focuses on building financial underpinning for the site that will go on well after I am not around. I hope that everyone who reads these words will someday make their way to Carnton, the McCavick Cemetery in historic Franklin, with its other wonderful Civil War heritage sites like the Carter House and the McLemore House. That brought me to tears, and I've only been introduced to Robert since January of this year and read his first book. What would you like to add to that, Jeff?
I would like to add a lot. So the big thing that Robert's actually known for is battlefield restoration. So he basically preserved this enormous plot of land around Carnton. And it was really him. He was a force of nature. There was a National Geographic article that came out. Adam Goodyear was at the who wrote the article was at the wake, because of course Adam became Robert's best friend too. But that's really the thing that I think was so interesting about Robert Hicks, is that he really, to him, the idea of the Civil War, it wasn't a fight to preserve slavery. It was because he really was very opposed to that, but it was a fight to create a nation. And that's how he saw the Civil War, and that's how he saw Carnton.
I think he said once that it was the Civil War was when we went from being, Georgians and Texans and Floridians, and we became Americans.
Yeah.
And that we kind of had to go through that to get to that process. I mean, to finalize that process.
So the other thing, and I really hope if anybody goes to Carnton, I told this to Susie, you have to get Justin Stelter, who is Robert's best friend and literary executor, who's the gardener at Carnton, to give you a tour, because you don't get the docents or anything else. So I can't even tell you. I worked on that book for like a long time. We going back and forth and trying to figure it out with Hunter, and then Robert taking it over and just redoing the whole thing. So it'd been years, and I finally went down to Carnton, and Robert gave me a tour of the house. At this point, it wasn't open to the public, or I don't know. I went on a day it wasn't open, but it was just Robert and me, and I was crying in room 2. Like, he had me in tears. And I knew this story, and I'm kind of sick of it. Like, okay, I know about the arms and legs over and the blood, and like was so magical. And Justin, who is his best friend for how many years? 20 some years, 30, has certainly imbibed a lot of the Robert Hicksness. So it would be, like when you see that, you realize how special like the house is and how special Robert was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The fact that he was able to get all that funding too is amazing. I mean, he pretty much single-handedly did it, and it's incredible. Yeah.
He used to do these birthday jaunts where he would go, like he'd like, we're going this year. I went to one year to Morocco, and there was a woman there who had a dining room table store in England. Like, who sells dining room tables? Like, how do you make a living selling dining room tables? And it was kind of amazing. There was some guy who was there. He kept getting called out because he was doing fittings for the Oscars, and then Monty Isom was there, who you all know, who did, or Isom, who had all these banners. He's a photographer, and his photographs were on Times Square, and he was showing us like. But this woman with the dining room tables, we were just talking one day, and she made some comment about John. Oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank. Who was the president of the prime minister of England at that point?
Major.
Yes.
Major.
I think it was John Major. And then she mentioned something about the Queen. It turns out that this woman like furnishes the most elite dining room tables to the upper classes and is a friend of the Queen of England.
Of course. Of course.
This comes out with Robert, right?
It's never about like name dropping. It's just these people that are fascinating and interesting, and like you'd spend a lot of money to go on these crazy tours with Robert Hicks because your life would be changed afterward.
And I'd always, I would hear him say some of these stories and tell me things, and I would think to myself, that can't be true. And I'd go home and I'd look and I'd, do some spelunking around. They were all true. They were all true.
Well, no, there was some Robert Hicksness that always went on with everything. So, like, I think.
Well, yeah.
But the Colonel, I think, was
the
there.
Colonel, yeah.
I love those stories. I just wanted to say thank you to that. And I just wanted to share some of the comments that we're receiving down from the Low Country from some of our author friends. Rebecca Dwight Bruff says hello from Beaufort, author of Trouble the Water. And Susan Cushman mentioned, also, Robert was so generous with his time and wrote a wonderful foreword for an anthology that she edited in 2019 with the Pulpwood Queen celebration of 20 years. And lots of friends are just sending love. I think this is a wonderful evening so far. Pamela, can you read to us one of your most favorite excerpts from The Widow of the South, please?
Yeah. This sort of encompasses the way I got to know Robert in design too. He's talking about, this is when Carrie is going through her house right before they take it over to be a hospital. And a lot of times with, I find with historical fiction, you see so much of the research when you read that you kind of lose the heart. But this, to me, this whole passage, I just love. So I'll start. She's in her garden and looking at her house. And she said, out the back and into the yard, the warm breeze wrapped me up again. I wasn't thinking about where I was going. My feet carried me across the yard toward my garden, but my eyes were drawn off to the right, to a small stand of trees ringed by a black iron fence. The grass was still soft. The breeze kicked up again, and I felt I would suffocate. I wanted to strike out at it, to slap it away. I stood in the garden and stared at the cemetery across the way. I felt the grave markers marching towards me. I thought of it as another grove, a grove of trees and of limestone and of children beneath my feet. And it was for this reason that sometimes I could only bear to look at it by hiding in the garden and peeking through the foliage. The garden had once been so lovely, so trimmed and neat, packed between the paths with obedient rudbeckia and peonies and roses and boxwoods and sunflowers and crepe myrtles. I had loved it unequivocally and had taken pleasure in its boundaries and distinctions, the concentrations of its colors and textures. It had been a rebuke to the very idea of uncertainty. Now the garden looked nothing like it did that first day 16 years before, when I was an 18-year-old riding up in my new husband's carriage. It had become ragged like everything else in my house, in Franklin, in Tennessee, and as far as I knew, in the world. In the summer, the rudbeckia took over much of the sunny side of the garden, and even in the night, I could see their bright and insistent yellow blooms from my porch. Bleeding heart, cemetery vine, and ivy had taken over the rest. The peonies fought for light, and their occasional breakthrough was cause for mild celebration. I would not help them, but I took solace from their little successes. So many years had passed since I had first gone to sleep at Carnton. The house had collapsed into itself. Like me, I thought without surprise. I stood there like a shadow among the browns and beiges of my once precise Italianate garden, and I remembered the first time I had seen the house. It was not the same house anymore, although this would not have been obvious to the casual observer. Its bones were still there, but very little of the rest seemed familiar to me anymore. This red brick neoclassical pile with the Grecian portico out on the front and its massive two-story Italianate galleries running across the entire back length was empty. We had retreated back into the wing on the east side, which had once been the original frontier homestead. We could not run that house without all the slaves. John had insisted that we send most of our slaves off to friends in Alabama before the Federals could requisition them, and anything else they could get their hands on. The house is much too big for Mariah to keep up, John had said. I had known this to be only partly true. The rest of the truth, I knew, was that my husband wanted me to quit living among our dead children, if only for a while. This did not stop me from drifting through their rooms and listening for them. I remembered the voices of my children and the sound of my own voice, teaching them their lessons and reading them Bible stories. The sound of the piano, the sound of the tall case clock ticking in the hallway. Nothing disappears. I imagined that the sounds and smells of the children existed somewhere, borne away by the wind. That was a comforting thought. They also existed in my mind as memories, but of late I had come to distrust those. I could never leave those memories behind. They buzzed at me like gnats. I just love that.
Thank you for reading to us, Pamela. That was beautiful.
So can I give a quick insights, since I can give you some insights into that?
Sure.
Yes, go
the
for
book
it.
was originally called The Grove. So it's interesting you read that. Yeah, it was called The Grove because of that grove of trees.
Yeah.
And I think I may have even gone out with that title when we went out to the publishers.
Really?
and they thought that was too confusing, and they wanted something with that talked about the Confederacy more. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is the argument that the author and I used to have about Carrie. Do you all have children?
Yes.
No.
I do.
So, because obviously Robert never married, didn't have kids, and when the book was being written, my daughter was 3. She's now 24. She was little, and I couldn't imagine losing her. I couldn't imagine her dying, and I couldn't imagine how Carrie, but I could imagine that if my daughter died, I would throw everything out and I would never mention her again. And that's how I would go on, by denying her existence. And the author was like, no, that's one type of strength, but that's not the kind of strength that Carrie had. So I don't know if you remember, but there's a scene where she goes into, I think it's Martha, the 12-year-old's room, and brushes at her clothes, and she's worn them out. But she constantly, like, her angels were at the foot of her bed. And so what the idea was is that that's another strength of not letting it go, like constantly holding up the dead to the living.
Right.
I could never do. And as soon as like that got figured out, that was sort of the key to the whole book.
Really?
Because if you think about it, Carrie spent her whole life as the widow of the South, as the keeper of the dead. She had that Book of Hours, the Book of the Dead, that she carried around, and that was her life. And which in a lot of ways is sort of Robert, he wouldn't let the Confederacy go. And I'm not going to comment about, monuments being taken down, and I'm certainly not condoning slavery in any sense, but there's something about not forgetting where you came from, like making sure that we remember the sacrifices that all those enslaved people made, and all the soldiers that fought maybe misguidedly, but that to just keep that in your mind strikes me as being a very powerful, important thing to do.
It's that balance between not forgetting, but yet at the same time not necessarily honoring.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Is we don't honor it, but we don't.
Southerner, you have to walk, and it can get muddied sometimes.
So I don't think we got there because the world was a different place when Robert was working on that. But I really thought it was such the idea of strength. I've never forgotten that when you're talking about characters and how do you make a character strong. And for Carrie, it was you don't look away.
Right. I just read over the weekend. I just read Hamnet. I don't know if you've read that, Maggie O'Farrell.
Yeah, really cool book.
Yeah, and I've been in the process of finishing my next novel and editing it and everything, and so I kind of saved it until I was done and saved it like the last piece of cake because I knew I would like it. And I read it in just a day and a half. And that struck me too, just like you're talking about that, Hamlet's mother kept him, she didn't let go of him either. So I think that is, and I think of her as a really strong character. I'm sorry, Susie, I'm digressing.
You're not digressing. I think Melissa agrees with me. We could sit here and let the two of you banter back and forth for as long as you want. I'm like a sponge. Jeff, it's an honor to have a literary agent on my little virtual book club. I wanted to tell you real quick the background of this, if you don't mind. In 2020, when we were all being locked down in our places, I was in Beaufort, South Carolina. I have a home there that I'm moving to soon. And I won a free author talk with Rebecca Dwight Bruff, author of Trouble the Water. And I was like, well, how am I going to do this where we can't go out? So I started a virtual book club in Facebook. And what was so wonderful is she said, what are you going to do next? And I said, I don't know. She said, let me refer you to another author. So that is where the whole premise, it's like our business model or whatever, but it is, I take the recommendation sight unseen, okay, whatever you say, and move with it. Our very second author was Jeffrey Blunt with The Emancipation of Evan Walls. And then it went from there. And Pamela, I can't remember.
Patty Callahan.
Patty Callahan. Thank you for reminding me. And so we've had a combination of New York Times bestsellers, debut novelists, brand new poets, folks that have written memoirs that were just meant for travels for their family. And it's been a God wink, a gift, and it's helping me combine my love for travel and reading, and getting to meet folks like you is phenomenal. I wanted to see, Melissa, do you have a final question for Jeff and or Pamela?
Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much for the insights, the behind the scenes and the really, personal share about the book and the process. So I'm going to open the floor to any kind of last comments.
Well, can I make a recommendation if you all need a book to read?
Absolutely.
Well, I was going to ask you because you know all the good books coming out. That was going to be my question to you.
Well, I don't know about the good books. I'm just going to make a recommendation of a book I really loved.
Yeah.
That of course, I worked on. But it's called The Violin Conspiracy by Brendan Slocum.
I've heard of that. That was you?
It was a GMA pick for February.
Yeah.
And it's the story of this young classical musician who desperately wants to be a concert violinist, and then discovers his old family fiddles actually a Stradivarius, and that launches him into kind of classical music stardom. And then the violin is stolen, and he has to get it back. And it's really well written and really fun. And the author, I really would remove my heart for, like I would with Robert. He is one of the most lovely people I've ever met. He had when I ended up selling his book, he had enough money to live on until February. He was a private school teacher for music in the middle of the pandemic, and he had no income, and he ended up writing this book, and it kind of has changed his whole life.
Did he write it during the pandemic?
Yeah, we sat down and met, and he had an idea for a book. He had a good voice, and I thought, well, let's see if he could do something. He started writing it in July. He finished it in September. I edited it in October, and we sold it in November.
Oh my God, that's great.
I love that. So you'll put a word in for us for him to be a future featured author on my.
Oh my God! Just like in fact, if you email him, you'll email me, because all the emails come to me. But named Brendan Slocum, Violin Conspiracy. Really, it's really fun.
That's great.
How awesome
Thank
is
you.
that?
Thank you.
Wonderful. Pamela, do you want to ask Jeff anything else? Or
that was what I was going to ask Jeff. Is what he recommended.
Awesome! I beat that one out.
Oh, you did. So you can ask me something. You asked me something.
What do you recommend?
Oh gosh. Well, I just read Hamnet. I love that.
What's your next book about? What's the new book about?
My new book? It's called When the Moon Turns Blue, and it's about what happens in a southern town. It opens at a funeral. What happens when there's an ice storm that hits a town that very rarely gets an ice storm, and it sort of sends everybody a little bit off their axis, and it does involve a Confederate statue. So mayhem ensues. Shauna's got it right now, so we'll see what it ends up looking like.
She's so nice. I like her.
I love her. I feel that's my editor, Shauna Summers.
Yeah.
At Random House in Ballantyne. She's I feel like I hit the jackpot. She's one of those people that, I'd want to be friends with her even if she wasn't my editor. So
we went out for ice cream, I think, last time. Like a typical Shauna thing to do.
But she's great because she doesn't let me get away with anything. So she's an incredible. She catches things. So you said that before. Oh, okay. She's great. But the book will be out next spring.
Well, good luck.
Thank you.
Before March 22nd?
Oh, I don't know. You'll have to ask her that. Maybe. It'll probably come out. My last book came out March 16th. So then the paperback came out this year, I think March 1st. And so they're probably going to try to keep it around that March schedule. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to head out. Is that okay?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Jeff, for joining us, for sharing your stories. I appreciate your time. Have a wonderful evening, and thanks again. I was going to say, Pamela, if you can head out as well or stay
Sure.
with us, whatever you want to do. We're going to
No,
do
I've
some
got to
book
go to
club
dinner.
business. All righty.
Good to see you,
Thanks
Jeff.
again. Thank you again for inviting me, and good luck with go to Carnton, and thanks for reading Robert's book. Really
You're
appreciate it.
welcome. Take care. Thank you for your time.
Y'all take care.
Bye-bye, Pamela. Hey there, Melissa. Wow,
Oh my
wow,
goodness.
wow.
Wow.
What are your thoughts?
Oh, I could, like you said, I could just sit here and listen forever of just the personal stories and the backstories. Oh, wow.
And I wanted to stick to 30 minutes, but then I was like, I'm going to let them keep talking. Let's just enjoy this. I just wanted to thank everybody that is watching out there. I know that I'm streaming this on multiple places. Please remember that if you want to write comments, you need to be in the virtual book club on that page, and then I can see them. I can hop around a little bit and check those questions. Did you, Melissa, have anything else you wanted to chat about the Widow of the South? Like, what was your overall impression? And then I'm going to do a commercial.
Oh my goodness. I just recently finished it, and it was one of those that you didn't want to finish because you just feel this strength from Carrie and just her intensity through the whole book, and just the relationships there, and just the period of time that she lived in, and then this house. So I'll leave it there.
I know. And speaking of that, I just wanted to real quick, so in case anybody is confused about what's next and what's going on, in addition to reading Widow of the South this month, I'm featuring Hither and Yon by Donette Dunaway Lee, our friend, and we're going to meet on May 10th. We've changed the time so that we didn't conflict with the Pat Conroy Literary Center and another very loved author that's going to be doing an event that same night. So on May 10th, we are going to hold our chat with Donette, just me and Donette, and maybe Melissa if she's free, where we talk about Hither and Yon, which you can get available off of Amazon by Donette Lee. Trying to hold it up straight, at 8 p.m. East Coast time. So everybody can be in their jammies on that one. And then the actual book that we're featuring, this was a recommendation from our formerly featured author, Sarah McCraw-Crow, and we're reading Finola Austin's Bronte's Mistress in the month of May, and we'll have that meeting a little bit later in June. And then last but not least, you guys heard it from Pamela, you heard it from me, you heard it from Jeff and Melissa. Right now, so far, it's you and me and potentially one other guest, and I really want more friends to come with us to Franklin, Tennessee for a really quick getaway. Looks like Estelle just said she has a personal connection to the battlefield there. She spent time camping on the property, and she attended a ball at Carnton. This has been a great read. This book will, with the story, more about what went on the battlefield, and that battle, and Carrie's story is amazing. Yes, so this is probably coming out straight to Estelle as well. We need to have a conversation about my getaway that I'm doing. It's not going to be a big, long 4-day, tons of event getaway. Just a chance for us to dart over to Nashville, Tennessee, go to the South, go to Franklin, visit Carnton, hopefully get Justin to give us the tour of Carnton, and maybe do a walking history tour specifically around Widow of the South with a woman who started the company Franklin on Foot. So real quick, do you mind, Melissa, if I go over the getaway itinerary? Do you mind?
No, and I'm
Okay.
just excited about it. So go ahead.
All right, I'm going to try to share my screen. You know how crazy I get when I do this. So let's try to see if I can find it. Here we go. All right. Melissa, let me know. Can you see an itinerary there?
Yes.
You can. All right. So you guys, there's a wonderful video here. I will not play it, but it's all about what we talked about tonight, how Robert has so many levels of influence. We're going to stay either at the main hotel, historic hotel, or outside ones that are like 5 or 10 miles away. We're going to start the day on September 12th with a boxed lunch at Carnton. We're going to tour Carnton. I'm having a hard time. I'm tongue-tied doing the slavery and enslaved tour, and or getting Justin to help us with that. Other things that we plan to do is later on have either a wine and cheese mocktail cocktail meetup, and I'd love to have some author involvement there that I'm still working on, and then dinner. And then the next day I have another potential author interaction over breakfast. I'm still working on that. We'll do this, the walking tour, and visit the Landmark bookseller store. They have a lot of history. And then we're going to hold a farewell dinner at this wonderful historical building. It was a drug company originally way back in 1876. And they've got a lot of farm to table type of food. It's a simple come into town and go out of town, arrive on September 11th. And then we're going to start everything on the 12th and leave town on the 14th. So if anybody would like to join us for that, please message me as soon as you can. And with that, I've stopped sharing and I'm back. Was my commercial too long, Melissa?
No, just right. Just right. So hopefully some folks will jump on it. I've been to Franklin a couple of occasions, just a lovely town. And the last time I was there, I was set to do Carnton, but we had a large party and we had to wait like an hour for lunch, and then we lost our whole timeline. So I'm really anxious to get there.
Yep. Yep. And if it's you, me, and a couple others, it's going to be a blast no matter what. But I'd love to have a few more friends join us. Feel free to message me on that. And I just wanted to wrap up with the fact that, not many times do we meet someone as outstanding. I can't even come up with the right descriptive word. But the stories that Robert shared with us in January, and again, not bragging, but just the matter of fact that he's friends with Prince William, or friends, his agent just explained it. Of course, he's best friends with so-and-so, and it's not name dropping. And take a moment, if I share that Travify, which is called an itinerary, with everybody, to watch that video again, just about what his vision was and the whole point of restoring the history of Battle of Franklin, that graveyard there, the private graveyard, and also the home, and having done all that, but not enough people visiting, and then to write this literary work, and then people flocking. And part of my feeling about really wanting to go too is not only what I read in the book, but I can tell that people might be a little worried, about the restoration and about the history and about the story, because he is no longer around, and he was propping that whole project up for such a long time. And I just want to share with as many people as I personally can about his story and about the story of Carnton. Because we do learn from history, and it can be icky, as we know, but learning the whole story, pulling back the onion layers, and understanding the enslaved history is so important. And I know that's important to you as well, Melissa, with all your wonderful poetry works. But here we are, 48 minutes in. I'm going to let you do a closing remark, Melissa, and then I'm going to say goodbye to everybody. What else would you like to say tonight?
Oh my goodness. This was just fantastic. I think what a great way to honor Robert Hicks, and with this tribute talk to him, and to keep his story going, because he has so many, I don't know, I can't think of the word, like I want to say tentacles. He has so many arms that people that he has touched, and it's just been great.
Yeah, it's been enjoyable, and thank you for being there for me. Right before we started, I sent Melissa a behind the scenes chat. My computer's acting up. If I disappear, you're in charge. So, hey, y'all, make sure to read Hither and Yon by Donette Dunaway Lee. And make sure to read Bronte's Mistress by Finola Austin. And we've got a new future featured author recommended by a literary agent. How fun is that? Good night, everybody. Thanks a lot, Melissa. Bye-bye.